Good morning, everyone. It's so nice to be with you. And I don't know, the words were refreshing this morning for this opening and day 3 of our conference together. As Michael said, my name is Corey Johnson. I'm the Carla Henderson Distinguished Professor at North Carolina State University, and so glad to be with you today and to be a part of the thriving team. Today, I'll be facilitating a panel called Fostering 2SLGBTQ+ Inclusion on Campus, Experiences and Reflections. And I'm going to try to stay out of your way for the most part today and instead privilege the voices of our panelists who are here with us today. And I'm very excited to hear about their experiences. First, we have Akeisha Lari, who uses she, her pronouns. Akeisha is the manager for student engagement and equity at Ontario Tech University. And as a lifelong learner with a passion for creating equitable, inclusive, and identity conforming spaces, she has worked in the student affairs field for the past 16 years in a variety of departments at both Toronto Metropolitan University and Ontario Tech. And prior to her current role as manager of the Student Engagement and Equity Unit at Ontario Tech, she was the Equity and Inclusivity Advisor, a role that worked closely with 2SLGBTQ students at Ontario Tech to develop programming and events and to guide the institution on policies and procedures that affect 2SLGBTQ+ students. Joining Akeisha today will be Yvette Munro, who uses she, her pronouns, Assistant Vice Provost of Student Success at York University. And Yvette rejoined York University as the AVP for Student Success in December 2021. And prior to her current role, she was the Executive Director of the Ontario Council on Articulation and Transfer, working with Ontario's publicly assisted colleges, universities, and Indigenous institutes to support over 60,000 transfer students. And she has held various roles in post-secondary education, government, and nonprofit sectors with a focus on policy development and service delivery for equity-deserving groups. Along with Yvette is Jean Pfleiderer, who uses she, her pronouns and is the former Sexual and Gender Diversity Coordinator for Queen's University. Now, Jean recently retired from the Human Rights and Equity Office at Queen's University, but her roles included that of Sexual and Gender Diversity Coordinator. And among other things, she's coordinated the Positive Space Program and assisted in the reorganization of the Queen's U Association of Queer Employees. She introduced Queen's first gender-neutral washroom policy in 2012, as well as policy and guidelines on collecting information about sex and gender in 2017. In 2020, she became the co-chair with the Deputy Provost of the Provost Action Group on Gender and Sexual Diversity. And finally, rounding out our panel today, Keegan, Prempeh, who uses they, them, eel pronouns and is the Trans and Non-Binary Inclusion Coordinator at Carleton University. Now, Keegan is a Black, non-binary Sagittarius son on a journey of self-discovery, radical transformation, and healing. They hold a BSW and have a professional background in sexual and reproductive health, peer support, and community-based research. And guided by womanism, collectivism, and the pursuit of social justice, Keegan hopes to foster meaningful connections and build community. So, a nice welcome to all of our panelists today. And we've asked each of them to just spend about 5 minutes talking about their university's approach to advancing 2SLGBTQ inclusion, along with the priorities, how those plans have been established, the role of research in their community engagement, and the ways in which the findings of our Thriving Campus initiatives have helped in their learning series. So with that said, I would like to give the floor over for the next 5 minutes or so to Akeisha. Akeisha, the floor is yours.
Wonderful, thank you. Doing a quick check. Can everyone see that my screen up there?
Perfect.
Perfect. Okay, awesome. Thank you. So thank you for that lovely introduction. I am Akeisha Lari, use she, her pronouns, and I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, which is covered under the Williams Treaties in Oshawa, Ontario, and I am here at Ontario Tech University. To sort of ground myself, I want to share a little bit about me. So I identify as an Indo-Caribbean woman, a second generation settler, a mom of 3 littles who I just took on a 6-hour road trip to Montreal this weekend. So I'm in recovery mode right now. They are 9 and under, 9, 5, and 3. That was fun. I've never stopped so many times in my life. And I'm a partner to One Big. I work as the manager of student engagement and equity here at Student Life at Ontario Tech. And I, sort of always like to share my education and professional goal in these sort of things to, streamline where I'm coming from, my perspective, the way I look at things. And for me, it's about creating spaces and programming for students, specifically racialized and first generation students, that's founded in equity, inclusion, respect, consent, and kindness. And, when my littles tell people, what does your mom do? They're like, oh, she teaches university students how to be kind. And I always think that's really sweet because that's sort of the core of everything that I do, where I practice from, where my heart guides me is always in just kindness. And I think when we can have that as sort of like the grounding of what we do, of why we do what we do, it leads the way for all of these other things to happen somewhat naturally. In terms of history of 2SLGBTQ plus inclusion at Ontario Tech, I'm going to sort of go from my perspective of student life and the roles that I've held here. And so the biggest thing I would say in terms of history is this university created the Equity and Inclusivity Advisor position. I believe it was around 2013-ish. Files are sort of kind of lost on a couple of moves, but I think it began around that time, 2013-14. And I began here in 2018 and was in the role until 2022. And I share that because I think this is sort of where a lot of our programming for 2S LGBTQ plus students started. The role itself is meant to be, or was meant to be, a place for students who've experienced discrimination or harassment, sexual violence, any type of those isms, as we call them, where they need support from a person at the university. And, this role was instrumental in building the first bit of 2S LGBTQ plus student connections and programming at the university. And the main thing that started with that role was Q Connection, which was a bi-weekly discussion group for queer students. And it was sort of the first thing that this university did in terms of intentional programming out of student life to provide spaces for students to connect and build community. And then from this role, students gathered and they connected and they wanted more. And so that led them to create the OT Pride Club, which is a student group under our union. And I was luckily able to be there with them and provide administrative support. And what this led to is, as we were, began to get involved with the Thriving on Campus survey in 2019, I had a group of students that were engaged with me, my programming, with our office. And that led to having this group of students that were interested in talking and discussing and sharing what they've been going through throughout their university journey. And I think of that as sort of like the on-campus community engagement that was sort of asked, what are we doing around that? And for me, what this meant was I also started to do a mini focus group and survey of my own. And I held a focus group with the students that attended our Q Connections and our Pride Club. And, sort of parallel to the Thriving on Campus survey going, it led to us opening up our conversation on campus a bit more to get feedback on this programming, what we've been doing, and how we can do more and do better. And so in 2019, that summer, I spent the summer with students researching best practices, listening and learning from other universities. When I attended Caucus, which is the Canadian Association of College and University Student Services that year, and just really went to a lot of sessions to learn more. And I took all of that learning with the students, and we began to think of how we can do some new programming. And so when I think of, what Thriving on Campus sort of did for our campus, it really was a conversation starter, and it was an opportunity for us to be sort of tapped on our shoulder to listen more to what our students wanted. And with that, I think the sort of biggest thing that came out of that for me was taking the survey results that we got in December of 2019 and bringing that to our senior administration. I had the opportunity to present to them. I wrote up a mini report to share with our provost and our vice provost. And what happened from there was our university started to be like, oh, okay, here are some of our results, and some of the takeaways that we got from the survey were really, we were really awoken in a way of what our school needs to do better. And I think later on, there'll be room for me to share a bit more of what that actual takeaways were. But I think the biggest thing I would say for us was a call on our senior admin and our leaders on our campus to not just have this be one thing happening in our student engagement and equity office, but to start to bring it out to a bigger student affairs mandate, to have all of student affairs, our career centers, our student learning centers, our communications departments start to do more to make this campus fully throughout every different area inclusive for our 2SLGBTQ+ students. And I'll end it there for now. It really did have a huge impact on us. So when I was asked to be on this panel, I was like, I would love to reflect and share how, from 2019 to now where we are. Thank you for inviting me and including me in this conversation.
Akeisha, we're so happy to have you. Thank you. Yvette Munro, I think you're up next on my list.
Thank you. I'm going to share screen now. Can folks see that?
Yeah.
Perfect. So in my 5 minutes, what I'm going to try to do is focus really on, providing folks here a bit of a context of our unique, culture here at York and our institution as well, and then talk about what we have learned through our participation in Thrive, and also how we're approaching the work going forward. And so York is very unique, and some of you will know this, but our colleague Corey, who probably comes from the States may not know this. We are one of the largest universities in Canada with 53,000 students, both graduate and undergraduate. And we will soon be moving towards having 3 campuses. We have a campus located in the northwest area of Toronto, or the center of the Greater Toronto Area. We also have a bilingual campus located in mid-Toronto, and we will be soon opening our 3rd campus in Markham, Ontario, which is just really a bit northeast of the city of Toronto. We also have a couple of what I would call smaller campuses or satellites that are both located throughout the GTA, but also internationally as well. And we are a very large university with 11 faculties dispersed across various campuses. And I would say in terms of an institutional organizational culture, and this is important to note, because it does actually affect the kind of work that we do, including the work in this space, is that we have both a combination of what I would call centralized and decentralized functions. So for instance, I work as the Assistant Vice Provost Student Success in the Division of Students. So that is a centralized function, and we do serve all the faculties. But it is also correct to say that within a number of our faculties, and I would say particularly some of the larger ones, or campuses that may not be, that are situated outside of the main campus, we also have very locally local services and planning that take place. So in some cases, one might say that we can actually be in a situation where there may be perceived duplication of services. It does make the work a little bit more challenging because, trying to figure out who does what, when and where, and working those details out, whether it is everything from, food services to the kind of programming and the kind of supports we want to provide for 2SLGBTQ+ students is important to note. The other thing that I'm always very proud of at York University is that I believe that we have a very unique student body. First of all, the size of our student population is in itself, I think, very unique. Most universities across Canada, and I would say North America, are significantly smaller than we are, and then also located in a very highly urbanized and very, very dense, it's probably the largest population in Canada is in the Greater Toronto Area. So our student body tends to draw off very much so from the surrounding region. And while we have students from all over the country and all over the world, it is primarily a high number of students that come from the Greater Toronto area, and the size is very unique. The other thing that is also, I think, a point of pride for us at York University is that we're very proud of the student body that we have here. I describe it very much the student body of the region. So we have a very, very high number of first-generation students. I'm a proud alum and very proud myself that I came here as an immigrant student, originally from Hong Kong, came to Canada, to do elementary school, and then continued on to do my undergraduate degree as a first-generation student here at York. So we have a high number of first-generation students. We also have historically very, very strong services for students with disabilities. And so we have also a higher than average number of students who would need accommodations of all kinds and range. And we certainly have seen that grown in the last couple of years. And we also tend to have a student body that tends to be a commuter, that tends to work a part-time or many hours outside of school or their studies to be able to afford post-secondary education. Not a very significant resident population compared to some other campuses. And then, of course, students who, as I said earlier, tend to particularly come from more working class or lower income households. That provides, I think, both uniqueness to York and also some things that we have to consider as well. And so intersectional work is really important to our work as well. In terms of our participation in Thrive, I want to share with folks today things that we've learned, or maybe in some ways relearned. And I kind of put myself in that place, having left York for about 4 or 5 years and then coming back. So some of this is my own relearning, but I think also a relearning as part of this exercise and how we are approaching the work. So, given our size, it's also very true that our knowledge of what we're doing in this space. And so some of the projects that we focused on was continuing to do our work around gender neutral washrooms. It kind of started off as a conversation around gender neutral washrooms and then became broader to gender neutral spaces in athletics and other areas as well. But we learned that our knowledge is dispersed, in my current role, whether or not I've been in for a short time or longer, it's not realistic to think that our knowledge is housed in one person. And so we have colleagues across the university in different roles. And that was one of the beauties of the group that came to Thrive, that included folks in what you might consider more traditional leadership roles, but also staff roles and students that are active in committees across the university. So our knowledge is dispersed, and that there's power and there's strength in that configuration as well. I think I also want to acknowledge that there was, what we also observed is that things were deeply affected by the pandemic as well as organizational leadership change. So, the way that we had worked in the past, York has a very strong culture of committees, working groups, task forces, you name it, of all different kinds, communities of practice. And some of that work was, particularly in this space around helping students thrive, was impacted by the pandemic. So some committees, particularly those that might have been more informal, didn't meet as regularly as they did. And some of that work halted, or it needed us to sort of re-engage in that work as well. And then we also saw over the last while quite a significant change. And so while a lot of work had been happening at committee levels, whether it was around gender neutral space, led by some of our key committees at York, like SexGen, as an example, to name one, but others as well. There were a number of committees that tried to find their new way, because one of the things that we did that was a good thing at York is we created an entire division that was focused on equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so we hired not that long ago a new VP responsible for that. And when that structure was created at the institution, it also meant, the committees that may have been housed in other departments or stewarded by other areas, where did that now fit within the organization? And so I think with that happening, some of that also impacted the work as well. And then I think the other thing that we also learned and reconfirmed and revalidated in this exercise is this work is co-creation. It's not a conversation that's led by a unit or a person in a perceived important, leadership role, but it is co-creation that brings together folks that are allies in this space, but also have lived experience. And so that's very important. And I want to acknowledge my New York colleagues who've been part of this, as well my new two co-chairs, Urshan Khalid and Jessica Tharier, who have been working with me in this space as well. Now, how are we approaching the work as we go forward?
Yvette, if you don't mind, I'm going to have to just cut you off for time here,
Okay.
just so we have a chance to hear from some of the other panelists.
Okay.
Great. If you wouldn't mind, Jean, I think you're up next.
Yes, I think I would not mind.
Great.
This is the first time that I have Zoomed since June. So I just want to share with you all that I'm a little rusty. In fact, I had some difficulty getting into the session this morning. So can I be heard and can I be seen? And is there anything else I need to do on my end technically? I do not have a PowerPoint.
I think you're all set. We can hear you great, you look great, and we're eager to hear what you have to say.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much. So I was very interested to listen to the two previous panelists, to Akeisha and to Yvette. I have a feeling that we're all doing many of the same things and making many of the same discoveries these days. But I'm going to use my privilege as a retired person to tell you a story rather than to show you a PowerPoint and talk in detail. I'm doing that in part because I can get away with it, but also I'm doing it in part because you're going to be hearing a lot more about some of the things that are going on in Queens in the next panel as well. So I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to tell you a story, and the story goes like this. In the fall of 2019, a group of mostly first-year Indigenous and LGBTQ+ students who were sharing a floor in one of our residences at Queens produced together an arts display in their hallway. It was sadly vandalized with threatening, racist, and homophobic comments directed at these students. And as you would expect, the campus as a whole responded with support of many kinds for these vulnerable young students. But of particular note was the response that the Four Directions Indigenous Center was able to make. There was a physical and spiritual place to go. They had a renovated center with a sacred fire circle at a teepee and very super supportive staff. And seeing that there was a need, the Four Directions was wonderfully inclusive of the non-Indigenous LGBTQ+ students as well. This was, of course, very gracious of them, and we were most appreciative, but it raised the obvious question: why was there a need? Why was there no sort of comparable level of support ready and waiting for our LGBTQ students? It wasn't as though no one had thought about the needs of the queer community of Queens. In fact, that same fall, we were celebrating 20 years of the Positive Space program at Queens. A half dozen years earlier, we'd put in place one of the early university policy statements in Canada around gender-neutral washrooms and followed that up with some additional work on policy. There was a student-led organization that had its own space, albeit it was small and kind of hard to find. Still, it was there. It was in the student union. And my own office, which was the Human Rights and Equity Office, was providing advisors who specialized in gender and sexual diversity, available to all individuals on campus, whether faculty, staff, or students. But it wasn't enough. The thing was, there was no central coordination. The result was that there was not only not an obvious and immediate place for those students on that day to turn, but there was no clear, coherent way to begin to provide anything else, really, that community needed, or even to find out what it needed. Now, like I suspect all campuses across Ontario in these last 3 or 4 years, Queens has been growing its EDII portfolio, and its schools and departments have created many new positions to meet the needs of diverse communities. As I already mentioned, you're going to be hearing about how some of that has been going on at Queens in the next panel discussing our Yellow House program. I'm delighted to see that my former colleagues, all 3 of them, are going to be presenting that to you in a little while. That's all to the good. But there there is potential danger that the proliferation of positions and projects could do more to complicate than to resolve the kind of problem we found ourselves facing in 2019, unless there's a way to coordinate all the parts. And that's where the Provost's Action Group on Gender and Sexual Diversity came in. You knew I would get there eventually, right? It's often referred to by its shorter, if somewhat odd sounding acronym, PEGAS. I may just find myself just referring to it as the Provost's Action Group. In the wake of that incident back in 2019, the Provost and other administrators at Queens, senior administrators, wanted to see some things happening, wanted to see what was wrong and try to fix it. And so the Provost wanted a group to be formed to advise the administration on what to do. It was a clear moment when the administration really wanted to know and was really prepared to listen. But those of us who were asked to form the group didn't really want to advise the administration. A quick look at the list of the Provost's committees told us that he already had 5 advisory groups going on right at that moment. Our proposal was instead for what we wanted to call an action group. We wanted to be small, we wanted to be nimble, we wanted to be a group that could support or initiate actions that would improve the climate for gender and sexual diversity throughout the university, a group that would be a conduit for connecting ideas and proposals to the resources that were needed to enact them. We didn't want to tell the administration what it would be good to do. We wanted to engage them in doing it. To put it crudely, we wanted those with the money and the power to be immersed in using that money and power to get some things done. And so in trying to coordinate such a group, we decided we would need 2 co-chairs, at least one of whom would have to have some actual administrative clout, some access to resources and authority to assign their use. And in our case, that person was the deputy provost. And we were very pleased with the assistance we received from the deputy provost. We wanted to meet with some regularity, not to talk about doing things, but in order to assure that the balls were in the air and that we were staying updated on whether things were going forward. We wanted to be efficient, but informal. We wanted to connect people to each other and to resources and get out of the way. I think maybe the key way to put it is we wanted to strive to be not so much gatekeepers as gate openers. So how did we make out? Well, there were certainly speed bumps along the way, but we did get funding through Human Rights and Equity and also approval from the provost to do a deep dive study on gender neutral washrooms and change rooms that we had long thought we needed to do. That then produced some recommendations, but recommendations are no good unless somebody does something with them. So we were able to convince the administration to adopt and budget for them, and they became a plan that is now being enacted with PEGAS guidance by our facilities people at Queens. That's the kind of thing we wanted to do. And I've been away for a few months, but my impression is that's what we are continuing to do as a group. People who asked to be part of the committee were as often as not asked to just come to a meeting and tell us what they wanted to do and what they needed to do it, rather than join a committee and make a bigger group to have meetings. The students who participated on that initial committee liked the action group idea so much they went off and formed their own student action group, and then they come back and ask for resources and authority to do things. So this is not a new idea, and there's nothing fancy about it, but I think it was an important moment to recognize that with the best will in the world, senior administrators are very busy people, and a part of the goal is always to figure out what can they do to make this happen, and how can we share that information with them and get them to do it. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Hey, Jean, it's a fantastic story. And just reading your bio, thanks for all your leadership and years of service. I hope you enjoy retirement. And thanks for coming out to educate us. It's such a privilege.
Thanks. It's very nice to be here. Thank you.
Great. Keegan, we're up to you. And yeah, if you tell us all about you and what you're doing at your institution, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, and feel free to like wave at me if I'm going over time.
Okay.
I tend to ramble and talk. I love to talk. So, hi everybody. My name is Keegan Prempeh. My pronouns are they, them, or yellow and false. I'm super happy to be here with you today. I'm the trans and non-binary inclusion coordinator at Carleton, and I'm certainly feeling very blessed to be on a panel with people who've done such great work for so long, much longer than me. And so I'm just really, really grateful for all your leadership and mentorship. I'm here today to talk about trans inclusion at Carleton. And so essentially, basically a lot trans advocacy kind of formalized trans advocacy kicked off at Carleton in 2010 after a trans student was unfortunately attacked in a bathroom at Carleton. And so many people came together, went forward to the administration being like we need more gender inclusive bathrooms, what are we doing to protect trans people on campus? And there was kind of some movement but not a lot of movement. And so through that there was a group of people who came together, a mix of staff, students, faculty, and alumnus community members came together to form the Carleton Trans Advocacy Group. And so that was in 2018 that there was formally trans. So there's a lot of other kind of meetings in between. And so those people in collaboration with or in consultation with many others organizations on campus created was the Carleton Trans Advocacy Group's calls to action. And Michael, I sent you the link earlier, so maybe you could put that in the chat for people to view. But essentially, there are 43 calls to action that go over kind of different avenues or areas for improvement in terms of making Carleton a safer place for trans people on campus. And so part of my job more recently has been kind of to help support the adoption or the adoption of the calls to action in Carleton's kind of strategic planning. And so we do have our general EDI action plan, and within that there actually is a commitment to making a gender inclusion work plan. And so the idea is through consultations with student groups, staff, faculty, we'll be able to kind of get more broader support and more kind of tangible support in terms of resources and time from the university. Part of that was the this is the first year that my role has been a full-time job rather than a part-time job. I'm still on a one-year contract, but one of the goals is to make it permanent full-time, so fingers crossed. And so there's also a lot of, there's been a lot of advocacy at Carleton around making multi-use gender inclusive bathrooms. And, it has been a very much so an uphill battle and continues to be, but there are all of the single stall bathrooms on campus are gender neutral now, or have gender neutral signage. In addition to, we have four multi-use gender inclusive bathrooms at different places on campus, which is awesome. And we're really trying to push to get more, but that kind of thing comes with resources and, I think, sometimes confusion around, especially, one of our business school got a brand new shiny building a couple of years ago, thanks to their generous funders. And so there was actually, kind of buy-in from administration at first to update the bathrooms, but I think there was some confusion on there. And we have brand new, this is a brand new building, still fresh paint on the walls. Why are you renovating it? And there wasn't enough kind of, I think, education and communication around what was happening. And so there was some pushback. And so now we're trying to push back against the pushback once again, and really just kind of, highlight all the, collectively identified needs that trans and gender diverse people at Carleton have made, which I think is, to me, I'm such a, I really believe in the power of community and in, individuals being able to name for themselves what it is they need and what they want to change and what they want, what we could be doing better to support them. And so, I'm just super, super grateful to be able to work with the CTAG operations team, which I thought was a really fun name. And I was very excited about it. And that's a mix of different staff and students at Carleton who are kind of helping to advance this project and trans inclusion generally. And so, yeah, I want to shout out those folks for all their, for listening to my emails and coming to meetings and filling out doodle polls. Because yeah, everyone here has already said so eloquently, this work is not done in isolation. It really is a collective community effort. And so that's a bit about trans inclusion at Carleton. And actually, I think I'll end it there. Great.
Great, Keegan, thanks. And I'm just reminded how many of us are always pushing back on the pushback. And I like that characterization of it. I think a lot of us are engaged in the pushback on the pushback work. So thank you for your efforts. I'll turn it now. So our goal here has been to introduce you to folks doing different sorts of work at different kinds of institutions from different social locations and lived experiences. We're going to open it for Q&A. I certainly have a few questions prepared if no one's eager, but we want to start and give you room to have dialogue with these folks. And so just looking here now, I have a question. How are folks challenging the unfortunate and all too common experiences of universities making action plans and statements, but not putting the necessary person power, resources, and whatnot behind these efforts? For example, short-term employee contracts, small teams, small budgets, so on and so forth. So with that, I was hoping maybe you might take that question first. And if you need me to reread it, I'm happy to do so.
I saw that in the chat. I think that that's actually a legitimate issue. It's a problem. I don't think that I have any correct answers. I think one of the things that we do try to do is continue to call that out or name that as such, and really focus on that. There are instances where I do think there are budget allocations to support different activities. However, they often don't grow over time. They kind of sort of stay, you know, whenever they're created, there's usually a big announcement and some celebration. And then over time, you know, a decade later, you see the same number of staff, the same number of budget resources. And over time, there's simply not enough. And so that continues to be a problem. I do actually legitimately worry about it right now because we've actually come out within our system, at least in Ontario, we've come out of a time where the budget situation has actually been better. And we are in a situation, I think, across the system where there's going to be a general tightening. And I do actually worry about what this means, particularly around this work at this time, at a particularly even more important than ever time. So I'm sorry, I don't have the answers other than to say continue to name it and raise the profile of that and challenge that. And I think connect across the institution, engage students and faculty colleagues as well in that conversation.
Yeah, I think if you had the answer, you'd be a very wealthy woman, right? But it's really important for us to continue to dialogue about. Keegan, would you offer anything in addition to Yvette in response to that question?
Oh, I struggle with this question as well. You know, definitely, you know, I'm an entry-level employee here in our Department of Equity Inclusive Community. So, you know, I don't have a lot of pull, you know, I mean, I have some pull, but not like comparatively not a lot of pull to other people in the administration. But I think what has been helpful or useful is being able to point to other institutions or programs who are funding things adequately or at least better than what the current situation is, and being like, this is what, you know, the standard is at like whatever our competitive university is, or like, you know, I know that our TA bargaining units were like the University of Ottawa TAs make much more than we do right now. We're in the same place doing the same work. So what's going on? And so I think, you know, being able to know that like there are universities of similar sizes who have similar commitments, you know, similar action plans, who are putting up dollars. So let's put up similar dollars to those people is what I would say.
Great, thank you very much. We have another question. It says, does anyone have advice for supporting students who are living in residences where there are very gendered spaces based on the structures of the building, traditional style, communal living, and washrooms, where there is both a desire for all gendered spaces and single gendered separations as well? Akeisha, would you want to take that question first?
I feel like there might be other folks that are better equipped to answer this one. I actually had something for the other ones. I'll pause here, let someone answer this, and I can go back after.
Great.
Keegan, would you like to address that question, given your role at Carleton?
Yeah, so at least I know that for Carleton, we in our, you know, athletic or our housing and residence is also part of like the CTEC calls to action. And so some of the changes that have been made for residents here is that people can know, or like in the selection process, people can like basically self-select on whether they want like say the same like single gendered spaces, or if they don't mind all gender or they don't mind all gendered spaces. And also, we have some of the more traditional communal styles, but then we also have like, our more like suite style accommodation, which generally is like, people generally tend to move into those together. And so and there is a equity, we don't have like a trans inclusion specific coordinator in equity, but there is an equity advisor within our housing department now. And I know that they also, they like, and I've worked with them as well to do, program or education for residence fellows, residence managers on the importance of trans inclusion. And so, yeah, I think it might, obviously it might be more challenging if you have, depending on the infrastructure that you have, but that's kind of how we got around it, is that we have a certain amount of designated spaces for people who are, don't mind living in all gender or don't have no preference necessarily for gender specific accommodations, and those who do. We also have like, we have a women's only, or we have women only floors, which are trans inclusive to trans women with trans, or like, that was something that's like been explicitly mentioned as well, that trans women are welcome on that floor. And so, and there was pushback around that, but they were like, we're not changing that. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add to that question? Akeisha, I know you wanted to maybe come back and say some things about the first question, so let's do that now.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So what I wanted to add for the first question was what I found sort of worked for me, especially in the process of putting some of the programming that we have at Ontario Tech, is I got the student union involved. And what I found is when my voice as a staff person isn't being heard, when our students rally and talk about action, that's when movement happens. And so for, a lot of things that we do, we get the students really involved and have them, I help to do the logistics of setting up FaceTime with our deputy provost or those that have that bit more pull and power. But I get our students and I meet with them and help them to sort of get their thoughts and ideas into a workable format, a report, something that will speak to those senior admin positions. And I get to be the liaison to sort of like push them forward with that. And when our students talk, people listen way more than I find staff and faculty have a voice in that. And then the other thing I sort of wrote is, in terms of wanting to get that pull and get the backing behind it, I found that I myself, I'm not a confrontational person, and I say that with knowing who I am and what my strengths are. And I found that as someone who does not hold that sort of vibe to me, but then when I do get passionate and that comes through, that's sort of been my pull and my sort of thing that gets people being like, this is important. And I think that oftentimes we think we have to be a certain way when talking to senior admin. And I've found like, yes, for sure, be, cordial and all of that, but let your passion through, let it shine that this is important, bring in as many different voices as you can. And the other thing that I've heard echoed a few times that I'll re-echo here is don't do things in silos, get those allies, get those partnerships, get those collaborators across your campus together, have a definitive sort of action and have a group of people saying, no, this isn't just one department wanting this is a school, a campus founded with, students wanting this, and put that forward. And I often find doing as much of the research and work ahead of time is what kind of gets that going forward a little bit more, rather than being like, here's the problem, can you go, sort of solve it? And I don't think anyone here would actually do that, but doing that background work is what I found helped me to sort of push that through.
That's great advice, Akeisha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Can I jump in super quick?
Go ahead,
I just want to echo that, because we actually just are going to make a lot or change to our infrastructure that will completely stop dead naming of people once they change it. And so ITS is finally on board and is willing to, but actually that really only happened after the QASA, or the Academics Staff Association, hit them with an MOU. We've been asking about this for years, and there's been no movement on it. So now we're gonna get technical and legal about it. And wouldn't you know, that changed some minds. So
for sure. We have two more questions if we have time. Let's start with the first one if anyone has an answer. So I'll open it to anyone. Are Two-Spirit students able to connect with Two-Spirit elders in relation to connecting to teachings, etc.? Is any of that happening on any of your campuses? Jean, I saw you nodding your head yes. Yeah, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
I wish I could speak to it better. I have been gone for a few months, but my sense is that the Four Directions Center has worked very hard. at providing that kind of connection for Two-Spirit students. They have for a long time, actually. They've built up to a pretty good program, I believe.
Great. Others? Keegan, did I see you nodding your head?
Yes, I was. Yeah, we have our like Indigenous Student Support Center, and so they they have like Indigenous academic advisors, and I know that actually the director of that program is Two-Spirit themselves, so that's pretty awesome. And I think super rad. And they have elders like Two-Spirit elders on campus, who can connect with people. Like, yeah, I really would love to see a Two-Spirit inclusion role at Carleton. That would be so cool. But we do, or that's my understanding, is that we do have that available.
Fantastic, and I think we'll see that increase across our campuses. Just one final question, and I know we have about 2 minutes left, so maybe I could hear from each of you on this final question, and that is, what are any lessons or words of wisdom that you would offer our 100 or so participants in the room right now on making change or advancing change for 2SLGBTQ plus students? And maybe we'll start with you, Yvette.
I would say sharing both power and leadership and responsibility would be one tip that I would give. And the other one would be staying nimble and agile, as conversations emerge. Don't be so stuck in the process or what you're going to do that you don't create space for new ideas and new issues to emerge that need to be addressed and that are important and particularly valued by the community.
Great. Keegan, how about you?
I would say be really open to criticism and accountability and taking accountability for what has gone wrong. I think oftentimes people, are very caught up in wanting to do better, and we kind of skip over why we have to do better or what has happened. And I think, just really, being humble in that regard and, making and not letting our egos get in the way of progress, I think is really important.
That is important. Akeisha?
I would say to know your why, really dig deep and kind of figure out, why are you doing the work that you're doing? What impact does it have? And in those tough moments where you don't feel heard or you don't feel like you're making progress, sorry about that. When you don't feel like you're making progress or anything's moving along, think back to that why and think back to, the small impacts you're having. Oftentimes, when you get caught up in defeat or challenges, it takes hold and it takes over. And so I've always leaned on my gut and my instinct and my heart to sort of remember why I'm doing what I'm doing and think of those one story that a student shared that, had an impact, and use that as sort of motivation in those times when things don't feel like they're going your way. And then the other big piece of it is just keep talking to colleagues, to people, to students. I'll say that a million times. Let them guide what needs to happen at the institution because they know best.
Nice. And as we transition to our next panel, Jean, any words of wisdom from you?
I just wanted to build a little bit on what Keegan said, because while it's true that I'm sure every one of us is very careful to, get our ego out of the way and do the good work that needs to be done regardless, not everyone in the world is. And it's important to remember that, and that there's no limit to what you can get accomplished if you don't care who gets the credit. So it can be very useful to let some other people get some credit.
And speaking of credit, let's give lots of credit due to our panelists for showing up in all of the ways that they've shown up this morning, but showing up on their campuses in ways that we realize and recognize are super meaningful. So thank you. Thank you.